Hello and welcome to Let's Pod This. My name is Andy Moore, and friends, it's good to be with you again this week. You may have noticed when you started playing this episode that there was a little E in a box for explicit, because I'm just going to start right now, kids, earmuffs. What the fuck? What the fuck? It's January 30th, and this week has been 10 years long. Jiminy Christmas. I apologize if you have kids in the car and that was not enough warning. That's what the E is for. But I would be remiss if I didn't start the episode by saying, what the fuck? What a week. Tuesday alone was very long and terrifying and tumultuous, and it's not entirely resolved yet, right? Of course, I'm referring to the memo from the White House, not actually an executive order, just a memo, just a memo that said they were going to pause funding, all federal funding, except for like a few programs, Medicare, Social Security. They didn't list Medicaid. Lots of questions about that in the briefing, lots of questions following up. And they came back and said, oh yeah, Medicaid's totally excluded. Never mind the fact that every state was unable to access their Medicaid payment portal for a period of time at the same moment that they were discussing this pause. They tried to say, well, it's unrelated. Friends, I think someone fucked up, and then they realized it, and they've been trying to backtrack ever since then. All right, since Tuesday, of course, that memo has been rescinded, to which the new White House press secretary said, well, the funding pause wasn't rescinded, just the memo itself, like the piece of paper. And that went to court, and it really was today that the judge ordered a restraining order against the White House, against the press secretary for her tweets that were misleading and causing just undue chaos. And if nothing else, right, by now you probably know that there's like 2.3-ish million federal employees who have received, also the same day, received an email from an outside source from this new domain that Elon Musk is setting up for the government that it's not yet fully vetted, and there's all kinds of security problems with that, but basically offering a buyout for all federal employees. But in addition to those, 2.5 million federal employees, this federal funding pause that would affect, if not you, then I guarantee someone you know, your spouse, your child, your cousin, something. Federal funding funds all kinds of stuff, a lot of which is in the private sector. The nonprofit sector was in shambles on Tuesday afternoon, or most of Tuesday. We were very nervous. Now, we at Let's Fix This don't get any federal funding, but a lot of folks do, right? If you work on, child abuse prevention, if you work in HIV care, if you work in roads and bridges, highway maintenance, if you work in the Department of Forestry, or anything to do with trees and environmental, so much stuff receives some sort of federal funding, because this is what government is good at. The government is good at funding and addressing big problems that affect the whole fucking country, right? This is we all would agree that there's a pain point with bureaucracy, right? If you've ever stood in line at the DMV or the tag agency or had to interact with the government in some way, pay your taxes, it's probably been frustrating. And a lot of that is there because we have lots of checks and balances in the system, and it's designed to design a system that works for everybody, spanning wide ranges in education and knowledge and experience and languages and reading ability, all this stuff, right? It is really difficult to deliver services for 400 million people in a way that is streamlined and efficient, right? Sometimes it gets a bit sprawling. But, to quote the West Wing, right, despite all of its failings in the past and those to come, government can and should be a force for good. Government, when we all pool our money through taxes, that's what's going on. We're pooling our money because you and I alone can't build a fucking freeway. But when we put our money together with another 4 million Oklahomans and another 400 million Americans, we might be able to build some freeways, or at least maintain a few potholes on I-35 for the rest of my natural life. But there's all kinds of stuff that we can do when we put our minds and our monies together. And that's what government's good at. Providing for the national defense, the United States Postal Service. All kinds of stuff, right? The U.S. Census. There's a lot of stuff that government does that is good and important. And to just try to hit the fucking easy button to stop all of that on a random Tuesday will undoubtedly throw the country into chaos, which is where we find ourselves today, friends. All right, well, this might be my most excited intro to the show in a long, long time. Scott is texting me. He's out of town right now and said he can't be here, but I will send him this and let him know that he's really missing out, because this is the kind of rant that he enjoys. Well, in today's episode of Let's Pod This, I promise to not rant the entire time. However, this week has driven me to drinking, and I know that the Biden administration says that causes cancer and is unhealthy, and it probably is. But one small glass of scotch is not going to hurt me when I'm just trying to cope with this horror that we're all living through together. I will also note, on a personal note, that my wife is at home with COVID. My youngest daughter was homesick half the week. My oldest daughter has a concussion. It's been like a rough few days since we last spoke on the podcast, so thank you for joining me. I hope that this weekend and the nice weather provide you some sort of relief. I know that many of you, statistics would suggest that 1/2 to 2/3 of you are probably dealing with either the flu, COVID, RSV, or some other sort of illness that's floating around right now. Oklahoma City has the highest rate of flu in the entire country. I dropped a smoothie off at home for my wife today during lunch, and as I was leaving, I saw our neighbor leave in her car, and she was wearing a mask in her own car with her kids, which tells me that her or one of her kids has the flu or some sort of illness. It's that time of year. Meanwhile, my throat has been I've had a sore throat and swollen lymph nodes or glands for 3 weeks. I had COVID last month, December 18th, and I've never fully recovered. My neck is still tight. It's really tiresome. So if my voice goes out in the middle of this, that's why. It is definitely not the delicious peaty scotch which I drink. All right, so today's episode, we're going to do a bit of a news roundup first, and then on the back half of the episode, we've got a delightful interview with newly elected Representative Ellen Pogemiller, friend of the show, but here in a new capacity as an elected official and as my state representative, that's honestly part of why I invited her on, because if you can't hold your own elected officials accountable and invite them on your podcast, then what are you doing, right? Okay, great. Well, first, let's get to the news. All right, and follow up to last week's episode, a little mention about Todd Hyatt, Oklahoma Corporation Commissioner Todd Hyatt, you will recall, is under investigation for some alleged lewd acts. I don't know if they're lewd acts, but inappropriate behavior. We'll say that in a few different ways. So the Oklahoma Corporation Commission, of which he's a commissioner, that entity hired a law firm, Riggs Abney, to conduct a thorough investigation into the allegations around Commissioner Hyatt. That investigation has ended. It's been 5 months ongoing. And basically what they concluded is, sounds like he said and did some things he shouldn't have done, basically flirting or making a pass at a woman. Commissioner Hyatt is married, so that's unsavory for sure, but it was an isolated occurrence, and it sounds like he actually apologized. He came on to someone when he was drunk, apologized later. Now, we've had other elected officials that have done the same thing and have resigned, but Commissioner Hyatt has refused. And this investigation is separate from the one we spoke about last week, which is primarily the Ethics Commission is investigating Commissioner Hyatt's potential conflict of interest, alleging that he had engaged in behavior that was certainly unbecoming of the office with like in front of or with attorneys that would be arguing before the commission. So a clear conflict of interest there. That investigation is still ongoing. And as always, I will link to these stories in the show notes should you be interested. I believe that's at non-doc if you want to check it out. And a little insight into how I prepare for this show. I pull up a tab on my browser for non-doc, for Oklahoma Voice, for Oklahoma Watch, for KOSU, for the Oklahoman, for the Tulsa World, the Frontier, and then usually the TV stations, right? So in Oklahoma City, where I live, KO4, KOCO, News 9, OKC Fox. And then I go through all those stories. I usually leave those tabs up most of the time. My browser's very crowded, and I'm always on the hunt for news stories. Sometimes I miss them. Sometimes we run out of time, and that might be the case today if I don't get back on topic. Second one is also a bit of a follow-up. We don't really have a lot here, but looking ahead, the U.S. Supreme Court, SCOTUS, if you will, has announced that they have decided to take up the case from here in Oklahoma about St. Isidore, that is the Catholic virtual charter school that is trying to get state funds, right? Public funds going to a private school, a private virtual charter school. Nonetheless, it would be the first of its kind in the country. I'm certain we covered it last year and maybe the year before. I forget how long it's been going on, but a long, long time. The issue at hand is that opponents say this is a clear violation of the separation of church and state, of which there are many that we're dealing with right now. This case was designed from the get-go, very clear, designed by proponents to go before SCOTUS, right? Like they want to get a ruling. Now, given that I think a majority of the Supreme Court now are Catholics, and a majority have certainly been appointed by President Donald Trump, it is really anyone's guess as to how it's going to go. I think a lot of folks are bracing for impact here. They are bracing for another Supreme Court ruling that would upend decades and decades of precedent. Heretofore, we have all known and been raised with the black and white understanding that there is a separation of church and state, that the state cannot unduly, that's not even the right word, but the state can't be using taxpayer funds for a sectarian purpose, a religious purpose, whichever one of those is correct, maybe both. But basically you can't use taxpayer dollars to fund a church or a religious school, because the religious school would be able to do whatever it wants, right? They would be able to refuse to educate my child who has disabilities. And that is the very opposite of what public schools are supposed to do, which is why we have public schools. I swear to God, I did not pay enough attention to U.S. history when I was in school, and you probably didn't either. I can remember taking AP U.S. history in high school and considering dropping down to the regular U.S. history because I was like, who needs this? Like, am I just working on this, too hard? Like, does this stuff really matter? Yes. Oh my God, yes. Students need to know the truth. And in fact, this weekend, I had a really difficult and insightful conversation with my own children, ages 11 and 13, about the U.S. Civil War, about slavery, and then about World War II, about the Holocaust. One of them has learned some of this. The other one is just starting to. And it was wild. My son was like Googling in real time. Like we'd have a question about something and he would like Google it up and like show us the results. And it gave us an opportunity to talk about trusted sources, primary versus secondary sources, that kind of thing when we're doing research. And it gave me a chance to hear what knowledge they have, what they've heard from friends, what they've learned in school, correct those things that might have been incorrect. And they both recognize that there is an importance in like having accurate information about what actually happened in history. And man, let me tell you, it was real funny. My daughter just kept saying, we were talking about segregation, right? And about drinking fountains in bathrooms and that kind of thing. And my daughter said, what? Why didn't they just sue so they could be allowed to use whatever drinking fountain they want? And I was like, oh, bless your little heart. Why didn't they just sue? I was like, well, because they weren't recognized as people, honey. They had no rights. They were not viewed as equal humans, which is a hard concept to wrap your head around, even as an adult, much less an 11-year-old. And then lots of interest about World War II and the Holocaust. Listeners, if you know of any resources that are age appropriate to give kids some more insight into those topics, send them my way. I think I've got a little window of opportunity here to share with them, educate them outside the classroom about facts of history, and I'm not going to show them Schindler's List yet. So I also heard that there are several local schools that are no longer requiring their students to read the Diary of Anne Frank, which I think was a formative experience for most of us, right, when we were in middle school. I know it was for me. Uncomfortable, for sure, but definitely brought home some issues that we might have otherwise thought. So anyway, that's that. St. Isidore Charter School before SCOTUS. I got off topic again. More on that sometime. They'll likely hear the arguments. I think the estimates are in late spring, like April or May. The term concludes in June. This will be a major decision. I would expect we wouldn't have that ruling probably until June. So hold on to your butts. All right, back here in Oklahoma, there's a massive teacher shortage. The last estimate I saw was that we have more than 5,000 emergency certified teachers. That's a new record. So congratulations, Oklahoma, on that. That's a real accomplishment. Top 10 state in the number of alternatively certified teachers. No, it's not an accomplishment. This is not how it's supposed to work. We're supposed to properly fund education, value our teachers, demonstrate to them that we are behind them, support them in their efforts to educate our children, and lead the next generation ahead. But that's not what we're doing, is it? No. So a huge need there. And there's, a tiny glimmer, a sparkle of light, a shimmer, not even like a glow, a dull glow, that there are apparently more students enrolling in education as a major in college than in years past. Only a few thousand of them, and we need thousands of teachers. And just because they're enrolled in college to be an education major does not mean they're going to stay here to teach, especially because they could go literally any surrounding state and make more money. Right next door in Arkansas, starting pay for a teacher is $50,000, which is about $11,000 higher than it is here in Oklahoma. Now, State Senator Adam Pugh does have a bill that would change that, would raise Oklahoma's minimum salary for teachers to the same number, to $50,000. That is something that was talked about 6 years ago, and we're just now getting around to it. Whether or not that bill goes through remains a big question mark, but at least someone at the legislature is thinking about it. Relatedly, Oklahoma's student achievement is still pretty low. Lawmakers heard reports this week from a national organization, the National Assessment of Educational Progress. Their 2024 reading and math results from every state were released on Wednesday, and it shows that Oklahoma was among the lowest performing states in the country with no significant progress since 2022, and we have still not returned to pre-pandemic performance. If that's going back 5 years, right? So that means 5 years worth of students have still not returned back to the same level. I know this was a concern during the pandemic. I think it remains a concern that we have not properly come in behind. Like, we knew there's a gap, and we should have flooded the zone with more resources, a concerted effort to help students get back to where they need to be at a age or grade level appropriate, and that has not happened. And that means that a huge chunk of students, 5 years worth of students, right, are still below where they should be. That means some of those students have already graduated, right? If you were in 8th grade in 2020, you're graduating this year or last year, I guess this year. So you're going out into the world less prepared than people a year or 2 or 3 older than you. And we've got to fix this. The ironic part about this is that this data came out on the same day that Ryan Walters was up at the Capitol presenting his budget to the legislature. Lots of questions about that from both parties, particularly about the issue of Bibles in schools, right? We've talked about this before. Walters, again, reiterated his request for $3 million for Bibles in classrooms. Had questions from people on both parties, including Representative Denise Crosswhite-Hader from Piedmont, who said, well, why can't you just get donations for Bibles? Like, why buy them? Every hotel in America has a fucking Gideon's Bible in the drawer. Clearly, someone's giving out Bibles. Let's get some. Already groups have said, you can go online. The Bible app, right? Like the YouVersion or whatever it is like free. We don't need to spend money, certainly taxpayer money, again, separation of church and state, on buying Bibles. Representative Cynthia Rowe from Lindsay said she worried about if inviting the Bible into the classrooms might open the door for other religious texts like the Quran, Wicca, atheists, or other religions outside of Christianity. And indeed it would. I guarantee there would be a lawsuit. And what happens right now if a group offers to put the Book of Mormon in every classroom, right? I could see the Church of Latter-day Saints like offering to do that. What's he going to say? If you let one in, you got to let them all in. That's how this works, right? So I think and also every library probably has these books in them because they're books that do provide some context, some information about the world that's important. So Walter's response was like, no, I think the Bible should be physically present in every classroom, along with the U.S. Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, to help contextualize American history. I'm not sure if you know, listeners, but the Bible does not mention America at all. At all. Not once. Not once in the Bible, the King James or any other version doesn't mention America. Why? Because they didn't even know we fucking lived on this planet. They didn't know this entire continent was here. There were people here. They weren't white. They weren't part of America. It was a whole, you know what I'm saying. If you're listening to this show, you know what I'm saying. It's just bananas to me. I'm still fired up. I apologize. I'll try to rein it back in. All right, so the other big issue with Ryan Walters this week, and this echoes what's happening from the top, right, is about immigration. So last week, there was a hearing for public comment on proposed rules, which have since been adopted by the State Department of Education to require parents to provide proof of U.S. citizenship at the time that they enroll their kids in school. This does not prevent any child from enrolling in school. And under what he says is this would just give us an idea, give us some data so we'd know how many children come from parents who are undocumented, and in theory, how many of these children are undocumented. Well, I'm one that likes data, but when this quote data collection is occurring at the same time that ICE is rounding up undocumented folks and the president is reopening Guantanamo Bay to house undocumented people, it sure sounds like they're creating a system to identify undocumented Americans so they can come round them up, arrest them, and then ship them off to a prison camp in Cuba. Huh. That's not ideal. That's downright scary. Can you think of any other time in history where an elected official used their power to round up specific groups of people, maybe based on race or religion, and then ship them off to a prison somewhere? Does that ring any bells? I don't care who you are, where you are, that's not good. Including, and I will be honest, including when the U.S. has done it in the past, right? It was wrong then. We put a lot of people into internment camps during World War II, and it was wrong then, and it's wrong now. This is not the way that we do it. Do we need to address immigration as a country? Yes. Is the way to do it by allowing law enforcement and immigration officials to raid schools, churches, workplaces? No, that doesn't do anything to fix whatever problems at the border may exist, right? That doesn't do anything to fix the system that we have for immigration. I said I was going to chill out, and I haven't. I apologize for that again. Anyway, Oklahoma, not top 10 state, bottom 10 state rankings for math, for reading, for all those things. Stuff that's, pretty important. States that increased a lot in rankings are ones like Mississippi, which is one of those states where usually we're buddies at the bottom. And Mississippi's passing us up. So that's also not, that tells you where we're at, right? There are immense problems with Oklahoma's education system that we could address, like teacher pay, like adequate resources, like making sure that we've got enough teacher support staff, buses, accurate curriculum, textbooks. Do you remember a few years ago? I think when we started this podcast, there was this huge issue where Oklahoma just had crumbling textbooks. We didn't have enough textbooks for entire classes to have one. They had to all stay there. Our kids are not achieving because we are underinvested in a system, because our system has failed them because elected officials have not prioritized education. I'm going to do it again. I'm going to quote the West Wing again. Education is the silver bullet. Education is everything. Schools should be palaces. Teachers should make six figures. Like, this is the key to the future. If we really want to beat other countries, if you want to beat China in this AI race, if you want to beat Russia in this AI race, if you want America to be great, to be a superpower, to maintain its position as the greatest country on earth, we don't do that by selling red hats and throwing people in prison camps. We do that by strategically investing money where it matters the most, and that's on our fucking kids. Sorry, kids, if you're listening. You may have picked up a theme here. Andy's angry today, and he's not hiding it. Okay. Just a couple more stories, and then we're going to get over to that interview with Ellen, which is much happier because I recorded it last week when things were rosier. Slightly rosier. Just like a dark shade of pink. Next Monday is the State of the State address. It's the first day of session. I'm planning to go to the Capitol unless one of my kids loses a limb or something else. The wheels fall off the car. Who knows what could happen between now and Monday, but my plan is to be at the Capitol. I don't know if I'll get in. They really locked down the number of seats available in there. And, back in the day, we'd get in there and live tweet it, but now you can watch it at home. And maybe that's a better option. Maybe I'll pop some popcorn and watch it here in the office. In fact, if you would like to join me, either place, we can either go to the Capitol, try to get into the House chambers, or watch it from the little snack bar thing in the basement, or we can come over here in the office and watch it, have lunch. Sounds lovely. Let me know. Send me an email or a text message if you've got my number. Email's podcast@letsfixthis.org. Let's hook up. Let's do it. I'd love to watch it with you and have a conversation about what's said, what we think actually is going to stick, and what we think is just pomp and circumstance. Anyway, one of the things we will undoubtedly hear from Governor Stitt is that he wants a tax cut. Shocker. I am shocked. Shocked, I tell you, that the governor wants a tax cut. And this is an article you should definitely read. This is from Oklahoma Voice from Emma Murphy from January 29th. It's got a big picture of Governor Stitt, who apparently is growing a beard and also growing out his eyebrows. And the article goes into a lot of depth about what he wants here. Stitt says, "I've been saying this for 6 years now. We need more taxpayers, not more taxes." And that's true, but I don't think that we're really doing well on that. He tends to only focus on shrinking taxes and not by growing taxpayers. So I haven't looked at the latest census data, but It's not increasing as sharply as one would hope. So his goal long term is to eliminate the state's 4.75% personal income tax. And while nobody wants to pay taxes because we all think it's a waste, we do like driving on roads. We like having schools. We like having state services, which is funded through state income tax, and some federal dollars, which are also in jeopardy, as I may have mentioned. It sounds like both House Speaker Kyle Hilbert and Senate Pro Tem Lonnie Paxton also want tax cuts. Everybody wants a tax cut in January, but they quietly will acknowledge that it appears that revenue is down over last year. In years past, the last few years have been pretty weird, right? We had a lot of federal dollars floating around, coming in, extra money there, and those have gone. And so revenue now is down. And if they cut the income tax, well, first of all, we'll know more when the Board of Equalization meets. I think they meet again February and April, I think. Maybe I'm wrong on those dates, but they will come back and certify what the revenue is actually looking like. And by March or April, they'll have a firm number for how much the legislature will have to appropriate this year. If the legislature were to cut the income tax by 0.5%, so it's 4.75, if they cut it down to 4.25, it would cost the state $660 million. That's according to Dave Hamby from Oklahoma Policy Institute, whom I trust. If they were also to cut the corporate income tax, we don't have the most recent data, but the corporate income tax brought in $915 million last year. Okay, so together, that's $1.5 billion, which is about 10%, a little bit more than 10% of what the state gets to appropriate. It's a huge chunk, an enormous chunk. And what happens when they cut income taxes? They have to cut services. I don't know if you've looked around recently, if you've hit a pothole, if you've looked at the condition of our roads and bridges, but god damn, every few years we go through this. These guys get elected, say, we're going to cut taxes. Never mind that last year was the largest state income tax, the largest tax cut in state history, right? That was last year. And now they're like, well, our priority number one is to cut taxes. You just did it last year so you could get reelected. Here we are again. You're going to cut it again? We don't have enough teachers? You're going to cut taxes. Our roads and bridges are failing? You're going to cut taxes? Oklahoma's 49th in healthcare and education, all this stuff. You're going to cut taxes? You're not going to invest that money in a way that makes a difference? We're already paying it. In your pocketbook, you know how much money you might save next year if they cut taxes? $30. The whole year, not a month. $30 the whole year. That's like one half of one tank of gas the whole humping year. This is where the magic of taxation happens, right? You put in your $30, I put in my $30, we all put in $30, and it adds up to like $600 million, and we can do something with it. But when you cut it, we can't. And all that it serves to do is to make rich people richer, and the rest of us have to drive on shitty roads. We have to send our kids to shitty schools. So this is not just a game of trying to get reelected. This is a game of helping out their donors, of creating two classes of people, the haves and the have-nots. And friends, we're in the have-nots. So, okay, I'm really having it today. I'm sweating in my jacket here in the Democracy Den. I apologize. All right, well, if they were to eliminate the income tax entirely, as the governor wants to do, guess how much that would cut? $5.4 billion with a B annually. That's like half the state budget, right? That's bananas. You know what happens then? Oklahoma is fucked. We go belly up. We don't have money to pay for anything. What are they going to do? Well, they might cut taxes for rich people only and make the rest of us keep paying it. That's what's happened at the federal level, right? President Trump proposed tax cuts that only help rich people. It actually raises taxes on the rest of us. It's not, he didn't propose tax cuts. He proposed raising taxes. Why don't they frame it this way? President Trump proposes raising taxes on most Americans. Period. Do some billionaires benefit? Yeah, they're going to be fine. Fine. Elon Musk doesn't need a dollar. He doesn't need an additional dollar of any money. The rest of us barely getting by. All right. Well, there are 190 bills, roughly, about taxation this year. Cutting corporate income tax, cutting corporate tax or income taxes. Governor Stitt says he's already cut taxes for businesses 2 percentage points, and he hopes to add momentum to that with a further reduction. It'll be a signal to businesses they can set up shop and be successful in Oklahoma. Oh, like Canoe, who just went bankrupt? Canoe, who you promised millions of dollars, who couldn't deliver? Oh, Tesla, who chose to go to Texas? Panasonic, who went to Kansas somewhere? All these companies we keep thinking are going to come here? No. It's not happening. When you don't pay for schools, when you don't pay for roads, when you have a state that is scraping by as the bottom, nobody wants to set up shop here. Again, I tell you, investing in the future is how you get people here today. If you want to increase the number of taxpayers, make this place a place worth living. Right? Right. Okay. Man, somebody, even without Scott here, it's really got me worked up. I haven't even taken a sip of this scotch either. I'm really missing out. All right, so we'll see. It's still early, right? It's still early. Session hasn't even started yet. Right now, everyone's all kumbaya in agreement. The governor wants a tax cut. The legislature wants a tax cut. Everyone's kumbaya. What happens, what I expect will happen, is we'll get into session. Things will slow down. We're not all going to be governing by press release and press availability, press conference. We'll get into it. We'll have hard numbers. The Board of Equalization will come out and say, oh, guys, guess what? You've actually got $200 million less than you had last year. So you going to have to cut something, but you probably shouldn't cut income because that already happened naturally because Oklahomans don't have money. They can't afford to do this. Things get cut. What you could do is find ways to make up the gap and then to be really intentional about where that money goes. Like maybe not to vouchers. Maybe it shouldn't go to private schools. Maybe that money should go to public schools that need it, right? There's lots of things we could do there. I have a list I've been making of all the bills that are ridiculous, and I might set up a bill tracker for those. I don't want to give them a lot of air, so I'm not going to talk about it right now, but come back in a few weeks. We'll see if any of them even make it past the first deadline. That's kind of my deal. It's like, I don't want to even waste space on bills. Aren't going to ever see the light of day, including some of these taxation bills. All right, and then one last note. I know that I've gone longer on this news roundup than I intended, but the governor said that he wants to send people who are undocumented but have been convicted of a crime here in Oklahoma and thus are incarcerated. So they're incarcerated, but they are also undocumented. He wants to send those away, like to a prison camp in Guantanamo Bay, perhaps. But there's a catch, right? In order for him to turn them over to U.S. Customs Enforcement, he would have to commute their sentence. That's right. The governor's in a bit of a Sophie's choice where he's got to either commute a criminal sentence or keep them here and keep paying for their incarceration. I honestly haven't even taken time to form my own opinion on this, but I do enjoy the irony that he's stuck between two things he doesn't want to do, right? His argument is like, well, they shouldn't be here in jail because they shouldn't be here in the first place. Well, homie, they are. And if they indeed committed a crime while they were here, let's say they, drugs, armed robbery, something, I'm sure a lot of these folks are picked up on menial, like drug trafficking or something, or like possession of marijuana or whatever. But let's say they actually committed a heinous crime and they're in jail for a legitimate reason and there was a jury trial and all that stuff and justice was served. That's the way it goes. right? That's kind of what happens. Can you imagine if the problem with this is that we might kick people out, might deport people back to their home country, and they would turn around and return, right? NPR had a really great report about immigration, people coming up through Mexico, riding on a train overnight, freezing weather, horrific conditions, got to the border, tried to seek asylum, were turned away. In some cases, they were rounded up and then flown back to their home country. They immediately got back onto the train and came back. There are people who are dedicating every ounce of their lives to trying to get to America because they want a better life. And some of these motherfuckers just want to put Bibles in classrooms, right? That's not meeting a need of anybody, right? That doesn't put food in the mouths of a single child. That doesn't put education in the brain of a single child. That doesn't put health care into the lives of anybody. That doesn't save a life. Doesn't do anything other than waste money. If we want to attack waste, fraud, and abuse, start with this homie trying to spend $3 million on Bibles he could get for free. On that note, we'll be right back with my interview with Representative Ellen Pogemiller. My guest this week is State Representative Ellen Pogemiller from House District 88. Ellen is now my state representative. I'm very excited to have you. You were I don't know that surely we had Representative Turner on at some point during their tenure, but I know we had Jason Dunnington on a couple of times when he was in office before when we started this podcast. So welcome to the show, Representative Pogemiller.
Thank you. And it's an honor to serve your district and have you as a constituent.
Well, thank you. This is a bit of a full circle for us because we've known each other since way before either one of us were doing this kind of work.
A long time ago.
We met when I was still running the HIV clinic. And we met over, not about politics, but about food security. Mm-hmm. So maybe a good place to start, Ellen, is for you to share a little bit about your background and your path to the legislature.
Yes. We met. I still remember that meeting because it was the kickoff of the Health and Hunger Initiative at the food bank, and you were our first partner. So, yay! So my background really is twofold. One, I started in nonprofit. I was in AmeriCorps, VISTA, which is kind of like the Peace Corps, but in the United States, and worked at a daytime homeless shelter for a year.
Where? What city?
Dayton, Ohio.
Okay.
Yeah, and so it's interesting because I heard a lot about homelessness on the doors. And
when you were knocking doors
when I was knocking doors for this election. And one of the things that was so telling to me is how not far we've come with addressing homelessness, because the solutions that we know are correct and right are to house people first. That was the message that we told everybody 20 years ago. Right. And here we are still talking about the need for housing people first. I just think now there's an even bigger pressure on having the housing available that's, that meets the needs. It's also quality and it's low pricing. So that's kind of how I got my start, was through that work. And then when we moved to Oklahoma City in 2007, the year Oklahoma turned 100, it was a really big deal. And my husband and I decided to stay here. I worked for the American Red Cross for 3 years, and then was at the food bank, had my second kid, and decided I was going to maybe take some time off, and that didn't fit my personality. So I came back to work, worked at the City County Health Department for a little bit on immunizations, pre-COVID, thankfully. Right. And then came back to the food bank, started their health and hunger program, where we really focused on that intersect between if someone's hungry, they're not accessing the best and healthiest foods, which leads to poor health outcomes, and how can we as a food bank talk about hunger through the lens of health. Did that work for several years, and then transferred over to kind of their government relations position. And it was a standalone position, and I'm very team-oriented. And so started looking for different positions that were in the advocacy realm, but also had a team aspect to it, and found Oklahoma Education Association and came on there. in 2019 and was their part-time lobbyist, part-time organizer in the field working with rural schools. And I was there for 5 years and then decided to run for office.
Yeah, that's wild. So our paths are parallel longer than I realized. So if you were at the Red Cross up until like 2010-ish.
Yes.
So when I started at the HIV clinic in 2009, and we would have monthly meetings at the Red Cross with Jeff Robbins and some of those people back then. And then obviously city, county, health department, and immunizations is something we care a lot about and people we worked really closely with in the HIV community. That's funny that we didn't meet along the way. And then by the time we did meet, it's often or largely by then, like social media was useful back then, right? In like the early 2010s or mid 2010s, and being able to connect with the food bank around that, that health and hunger program was awesome.
Yeah.
I just the other day, last Friday, actually, I ran into the woman who is our dietitian at our clinic, at a local brewery, and she's not there anymore either, at the HIV clinic, but the program is still going, and they still do like a monthly food farmers market with like fresh produce, and still are serving that community and getting them access to fresh produce. And I think about, the cost of eggs and everything else in the last 5 years and how beneficial it was in the before times. I'm certain that it is even more beneficial right now. But it was so exciting. I remember like along the way when we were really up and running with that, and that we would have like fresh produce like strawberries and basil that had been picked at like 11 a.m. and then like triple washed, and then they would deliver and we would hand it out at like 2 p.m. And it was, we talk a lot about like farm to table, and this was literally like farm to table, like, and only passed through 3 sets of hands, and mine was one of them and yours was another, and that was a really like impactful, important program. So, and the
dietitian would provide food.
Yes.
She would do a little
make recipes,
and allow clients to try it as they went through. I loved it so much.
It's like going to Sam's when they give you the little ice cream cones, but this is healthier.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, Ellen, thanks so much for that history, and thanks so much for your service to our state, I think, for a long time, and to Ohio. So you were elected this last November for HD 88. Tell us a little bit about your experience. I'm certain that you have knocked doors for candidates in the past, but never for yourself.
Yes.
What was that like? Like, what did you learn in your campaign that was an eye-opening kind of experience?
It was, that to me is one of my favorite parts about running for office was knocking doors. In full transparency, only about 20% of people actually open their doors, so it can be a little defeating at times because you're spending so much time to try to have real conversations with people. And I don't blame people for not opening their door, but, it does make it a little bit harder to have those types of conversations. And so for me, I think a few things. One, you don't realize how personal like these stories are going to be that people tell you. Just honestly, 2 weeks ago, I wasn't knocking for myself, but I was out knocking doors in my community where I had knocked before. And a gentleman came out, and I had never met him. I had met his wife when I was knocking doors. And I said, "Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. Your wife had told me to knock your door when you were home, and I never got back around. So I'm grateful that I have the opportunity." And his daughter was there, and he looked over at her, and she said, "We're happy to have you here. Mom died 2 weeks ago."
Oh my gosh.
And it was like, you have little moments like that you don't expect. These really like community feeling, like these are my neighbors. And I said, "Oh my gosh, I'll leave." And he said, "No, come in. I wouldn't have answered the door if I didn't want to talk." And I ended up sitting in his house for 30 minutes and just talking about, he was, 81 years old, and just listening to his story. Yeah. And so those are like obviously the most meaningful types of conversations that you can have. But I also think, going back to homelessness, that was an issue that rang over and over and again on each door. But every time I talked to people, it was through the lens of empathy. So many people sometimes we don't want to serve. And the district we live in really believes in the value of, how do we help people who are unhoused? That was their perception. So I think it really allows you a lens of how people feel about key issues. And So I don't know. That to me was the most beneficial thing.
Yeah. And we should say, for listeners who may not know where HD 88 is located, it's basically the middle of Oklahoma City, right? So it on the west, it's like Portland-ish, I-44, and then it goes east to like 235, right? And then roughly, how far south? 10th Street-ish?
And 13th Street.
Okay.
And then the northern boundary is a little bit wiggly.
But it's like up around 36th to
Yes.
50th-ish, right?
Correct.
So it's neighborhoods like Gatewood, where I live, Mesta Park, Heritage Hills, Paseo, Cleveland,
Military Park.
Crestwood, Military Park, Asian District.
Yep. All the way to
that.
Linwood.
Yeah,
Oops, sorry.
right. Yeah, so what many people would refer to as the bubble.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's right in the smack in the middle, and an area where there are probably a disproportionate number of unhoused folks, that homelessness is a issue. I mean, I live somewhat, just near-ish 23rd and Penn is the nearest major intersection. And I think anyone who's driven by there is like very familiar with that 7-Eleven and with the bus stops that are there, and there's some homeless encampments around there, and just like the issue is ever present. And at least for me, my wife and I think about it a lot, and we're big supporters of curbside and some of those other like homeless social entrepreneurship programs, and always trying to find ways to like make a better community. And my two older kids, live most of the time with their mom in Edmond, where there is homelessness. It's not maybe as visible or as pronounced as it is like in our neck of the woods. And so, even as a parent, it provides some opportunity for really difficult conversations. So like this most recent cold snap, my daughter's like, hey, what happens when it's really cold? And one of my friends works for the city in this programming. So I was like, well, we should talk to him about, how they scale cold weather shelters, and like how we as a community can help address it. And, that's those conversations that, as a parent are like, you don't ever want to have them because they're difficult, but it is important to like help kids begin to wrestle with like, what is your role in this society, and like how can we help, right? So sometimes we make dinner and we've got a bunch of leftovers, and my daughter might be like, could we give these to somebody? And you're like, yep, great idea, let's pack it up, let's go. And so those kind of issues are ever present, even if it's not necessarily impacting my family directly.
Correct.
So that's great. So knocking doors, making those connections, much different when it's you than it is if it's somebody else. But often now, especially, like you get to have kind of both conversations at the same time.
Yeah. That part's fun because now, you talk a lot about what you hope to do and what you want to do. And now the conversation is like, what's happening now? What are you actually going to do?
Right.
You're there.
Yeah.
So
the election was in November, and then your role, like as legislator, kind of starts happening pretty quickly, right? There's the swearing in ceremony. There's essentially orientation, like new employee orientation, new legislator orientation. Tell us a little bit about what that's like. Did you have any awareness of that process before getting elected?
No, it happens much quicker than you expect. I think whatever day election was November 8th or 9th, and we were sworn in November 20th.
Yeah.
And so
like 2 weeks later.
2 weeks later, you're sworn in, and then you immediately, the speaker is in charge of kind of creating that orientation. And so ours was like a 2.5-day orientation where they brought in, the lawyers who help craft the bills. Each agency has budget, or each area kind of has budget analysis, and they bring in those individuals to talk about.
And these are like staffers that work for the House.
Correct.
Yeah.
So staffers that work for the House. You learn very quickly that there's a big internal competition between Senate and House.
Oh, yeah.
Which I was really not expecting. So there's a lot of digs and out, like, you're here with us. Thank goodness you're not with those guys. They don't know what they're doing. That
right.
kind of.
It's the old joke, right? That the Senate is not the opposition. The Senate is the enemy. The other party is the opposition or something.
Yes. Yeah. So, and that, I was not expecting that for some reason. So, yeah, you really are provided this huge overview of how it all works. And, here's who your contacts are going to be. And by the way, December 14th, you need to kind of have a theme idea of what all your bills are going to be.
Right. So you've got 2 weeks before we
Yes.
swear you in, and then you've got another 2 weeks before you have to have your bills ready.
Yeah. You don't have to have them fully, but you have to at least have the placement of
Okay.
my bills are going to come from this title. And then, so you kind of submit that.
That's the bill request.
That's the bill request. And then each of those, based on your title or topic, go to what I was telling you were the attorneys who help craft the bills with you.
Mm-hmm.
And so you are assigned an attorney, and then you go from there. Hey, here's what I meant by this. Here's some ideas. And then it's a back and forth between you and the attorney before you submit that bill.
To do the bill drafting. How many of those bill drafting attorneys are there? Do you have an estimate?
I think there's only 8.
Okay, 8 for 101 members.
Yes.
I bet their life sucks right now, right? Like that month between bill request and bill filing, which was like last week, during the holidays is a really busy time for them.
I have so much more sympathy for them because you have 3 deadlines. You have to kind of hey, here's what the issues are, big picture. Then you have to kind of get some information to them of what that looks like. And I think that date was December 29th. So people are working all over the holidays. And then your last deadline was January 19th or something.
I know historically the House has had a limit on the number of bills each member could file. Was that still the case under the new rules?
So technically we were told that you cannot file more than 20 bills.
Whoa, okay, that's higher than it's been in the past.
But you have, but you only have 8 bills that can be priority bills.
Okay.
So only 8 technically can be submitted to committees.
Okay. So you can file 20 if you want the headlines.
Yes.
And then only 8 might have a chance of being heard. Okay.
Correct. And then there was some exceptions to that rule. I was told Representative Humphreys out of Southeast Oklahoma filed 43 bills.
Sure.
And also in the House, we have, you know what it's called, where you don't put the language in the bill.
Shell bills.
Shell bills. And so,
Yeah, and the Senate doesn't really have that.
Correct.
And I saw this year on the schedule, on the agenda or the schedule that was posted on the Senate website, new pro tem Lonnie Paxton, stipulated, there's 6 deadlines in January. It's these are the dates when you have to have language and have to be ready and to the drafters. And then it was very pronounced, or I was oh, that's not the way it's usually been. And just was a little thing to me to be oh, he really wants to get a handle on this process to make sure that people aren't messing around. Mm-hmm. Yeah. In the House, historically, the rowdier chamber.
Rowdier, yes.
Of the two. I know when you were running, you said you felt like more of a House person than a Senate person.
I do, yeah.
Everyone's personality is a little bit different in that way. It's funny. I probably know more House members because there's more of them. And they're always the Senate's stuffy. Over here is where it's real, the people's house.
Yes.
Governing happens.
Yes.
That's interesting. I assume they have agency heads come in and give you a little bit? Because while you have worked around the Capitol for a number of years and familiar with advocacy, working at OEA, obviously, you kind of know the nuts and bolts of it, but it is different to be of the Capitol, right? To be a legislator. And a lot of folks who get elected ran on a platform of not being of nor around the Capitol. They're an actual outsider, and they might come in with a surprising, perhaps shocking lack of understanding or even knowledge about how government works. And so they have to do some sort of orientation, but that has to be crafted to meet each of you where you are, right? So if you're doing a presentation for 101 people, and some of them are A+ students who've already done the reading, and then there's some folks who just rolled in off the bus, then it's a wide range of background knowledge. What was that like for you?
So I had, your assigned committees and the budget committees. So if you see an A and B at the end of it, those are your committees that are going to look at the budget and really the money that goes to the agencies. And so I'm on only one A and B committee. I went to the meeting yesterday, which was Human Services. And to your point, there were 2 new members on that committee, but everyone else had been on that committee. And so, and each committee, each agency had about 35 minutes.
Okay.
And so,
It's a long meeting then.
It's not really enough at all. But so, these poor agency heads are trying to like provide an overview of the work that their agency does, while also trying to come to the table to switch quickly to really their priority, which is additional funding and why they need it.
Right.
And then open it up for questions so that you can, get to the heart of what the needs are of that agency.
Right. That's a big task.
It's a big task.
Are you someone that takes notes? Like, do you just have notebooks full of stuff now?
I'm like,
you have it right in front of
you.
Yeah.
Yes. I'm always taking notes. There's so many acronyms and, who served. And I attended the library event yesterday, and I have like a million questions, but also understanding that maybe that wasn't the room to kind of get into the nitty gritty of why Lawton doesn't have a municipal, we have a library system, a metropolitan system.
Right.
They don't have like a metropolitan system.
Oh, they're not part of like the Pioneer Library System or one of those?
No, so it looked as if they don't have local tax dollars that go to fund their library. But anyway, so that was something very interesting to me. But also I could have derailed the entire meeting just for a knowledge that it was curious about, but not important to the actual conversation of the meeting.
This, should I ever serve, I'm so glad you said this, because this is something I would struggle with too, where it's like, I want to fix every problem I come across, and there are just too many. Right?
Totally.
And so that kind of thing, I'd be like, hang on, stop. You don't have a library? Can we just take this meeting to fix that? Like, let's get you a library. And that is clearly like a years-long process that would have to be, that would involve thousands of people, multiple levels of government.
And they have a library, but it's not funded at the same level. They're at the the bare minimum funding through the state, not at a city level too. So I don't know. Fascinating.
I know that we have a number of librarians who listen to the show. I think they're all in the metro or surrounding areas. But if any of you librarians are connected to the Lawton area, let us know.
Yeah, let me know.
Representative Pogemiller would love to talk to you because she needs ideas for next year. Well, let's talk about the bills that you filed this year. I pulled them up, and this is part of why I wanted you to share your background, because you've got, you worked at the food bank, you worked in education, you've got bills about food security, about education, about elections. And so I don't know which of these are your priority bills, but I'll let you kind of highlight the ones that you think people should know about most.
Perfect. So I will, one of my priorities, I would say the majority of the conversations that I had in the community, whether it was on doors or outside of door knocking, focuses on public education. Sure. And there is a lot of concern around mental health resources within the school community. Under Superintendent Joy Hoffmeister, she took ARPA dollars to create a counselor corps program, and it was about $12 million a year. It was a 50-50 match between the district and the state. Over 180 school districts participated in it. Over 300 school counselors, mental health workers were funded by it. And when those ARPA dollars went away, unfortunately, our State Department of Ed did not put it as a priority in their funding. And so I feel very strongly that that was a successful program. And when we talk about, we like investment from the local level too, I hear a lot, I want their teeth to be, whatever. I think there's a phrase like that, to be in it. And I'm like, so to me, it's only $12 million a year to continue that program.
Right. Which is a lot of money if it's in my bank account. But in the context of the larger state budget, it is pennies. Pennies. And I think it's addressing a really big need. Right. And I would love to fund that at a higher level. But that to me was, something that I would like to address. Yeah. And we have a successful method that was proven to work within our school systems. So the second thing I have a bill on SNAPS, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, which, food stamps. And
right now, seniors that have SNAP and that are 60 and older, they have to reapply for those benefits every single year. And that can be a deterrent. And
Sure.
so Texas, some states around us passed it's like an electronic simplified method, and you only have to do it every 36 months.
Oh, so every 3 years.
Every 3 years. And so that to me is very reasonable. And it ensures, that monthly check. That's the biggest part is like, those individuals rely on those dollars to provide food for themselves.
Yeah.
So
we run into this in a personal way with my father-in-law. And he's not currently a SNAP recipient, but that might change in the next year. But he doesn't have a smartphone, he doesn't have internet access. He has never sent an email. He had an email account that my wife set up for him because she had to sign up something. He's never sent an email. And so if it doesn't happen over the phone, he's not doing it. And so like, even when he goes to the doctor and gets like text reminders, he'll just call and be like, I got messages, but I think he can read them. He has a flip phone. Like, so I think he can read some of the messages if they're text only, but, so he's not in the group chat because he doesn't text. And it is increasingly difficult for him to navigate the world. Because like, if you've got to just make a phone call, that's going to be an hours long process. And like everything where you have to find the paperwork and enter, it's just a whole hurdle. And so as we've been exploring some of those like safety net programs that he might qualify for, we're like, oh, this is going to be the one of us has to take time out of our day, out of our job, take time off of our job to go with him to do this thing. Even like if he's got to drive across town, he doesn't have Google Maps. Like he's got to like, someone has to tell him how to get there. And just, this is such a funny, like the idea of explaining someone how to go somewhere else with like a paper map is not something that like our kids will ever know.
No,
right?
I mean, we were paper map people, at one point, and even that feels like
I had one of those Mapsco books where you'd like turn to page 47 and then look at like 016 and then have to like look in the square to find the street and then figure out how to get there from wherever you were. That's not how it is now. But for him, so I mean, he goes to the same grocery store and he's like, he used to live in Norman and he's like, he knows where the Walmart is in Norman, but not the Walmart at like Belle Isle, which is way closer. Yeah. And we're like, oh, there's one right up the street. And he's like, I know how to get to Norman. I was like, well, that's like 30 miles away. And he's like, I know how to get there. I like that store. I'm going to go there. And now as he gets older, he's like, oh, this highway thing is getting a little treacherous. And so we're having to like drive him multiple times so he can like learn the route to the Walmart that's 3 miles away. But that kind of stuff, there's an enormous swath of the population who are in that boat, right? Like he's not really unique in that way. And so when we are addressing how to structure aid programs from the state, we have to bear in mind, this is not just for, Gen X or Z or whatever letter we're on now that like is smartphone capable and able to like figure stuff out.
Right.
It really, you got to like design it for those that have the least resources to ensure that they still have access to it.
Yes. I'm
on a soapbox. Sorry.
Yeah, no, but I completely agree. And I think there are 23 states that offer simplified processes for seniors. And I don't know who would be against making sure that, our hungry seniors have access to and that monthly check is very minimal, but it's enough to really help seniors get by each month,
right. Right.
So
I don't know who would be against it either, except some people that are against giving kids food, and that seems crazy to me.
I know. And maybe, so I'll just do one theme from every topic.
Sure.
The other bill that I'm excited about, and actually Representative Daniel Pay is running a similar bill, but his is not a state question. It's a statute fix. But we're both running bills that address right now if individuals or, the state decide that we're going to have a state question, we get enough votes for the state question. Currently, that decision of when the ballot goes on to an election cycle is chosen by the governor. at a whim. It doesn't feel like it has a lot of, purpose behind that choice. And so my bill is actually a state question to say the governor can no longer decide. It'll just always be on the next November election.
Okay. Is that presumably like every 2 years? There's a November election. Like
we did a state question. Oh, we did it I guess it would be I just said every November.
Okay.
So,
which in some ways makes sense. Like, because we often have special elections in November, even in odd numbered years.
Yes.
And that would kind of ensure that it's coming up to whatever's next. So you're not having to wait a year and a half or something.
Correct.
And this is, I assume, is somewhat in response to the governor placing the minimum wage state question that has already qualified for the ballot.
Overqualified with
Right.
signatures.
That's right. Way overqualified. And it did so before the last November election, but he assigned it to the 2026 November election. So
June.
June. Sorry. That's
Yeah.
right. So we have to wait a year and a half before we get to vote on it, which is difficult both for the campaign, just like logistically, but also seems to like kind of erode. Like if 200 or 300,000 people sign this petition saying we want to vote on this because we want the people to decide, for one person to come in and be like, yeah, you can decide in like 2 years, that's not the same.
Not the same. And at the state level, legislators can pass a bill that creates a state question.
Right.
And that goes on the November ballot.
Right.
So, let's just equal the
Yeah.
playing field,
Yeah.
and I honestly we talk about, there are a lot of elections in this state, but like creating November as a priority every year election, I don't think is, a bad thing.
No, it makes sense to most people.
Yeah.
And this bill would also like essentially just remove the politics from it, right?
Correct.
It's not up to a person. It's also not like a separation of powers issue because it's not the legislature deciding or the courts deciding the date. The date would be in statute or in the Constitution.
Right.
And that's the date.
Correct.
And then just like the actual election already is, like there's already dates in the Constitution. That seems to make sense to me.
Yeah.
I do want to ask, I saw that you have a bill about automatic voter registration, which is, something that we care a lot about here. Let's Fix This. Tell me about that.
So that's twofold. One is in doing research, and I actually think I reached out to you, Andy, one day when I was on the door. I don't even know if you remember that, but
I do.
just saying.
Yes. I was trying to give you a softball here.
Yeah. Right now, if you, this would change to, when you're re-upping your driver's license, you would have the option to sign up to register to vote that day. So you can opt out of it. We're not going to force anybody, but it's going to be more of a direct process. Like I'm filling out my driver's license and now I'm filling out or updating my voter registration. And then at the end, I did add a component after talking to a constituent on the door to add a component where you could get text messages,
Right.
reminders for when elections are.
The state already has. You can sign up for them. This would just make the process of signing up easier.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Because you can go onto the website, but it's not intuitive to find text reminders. And so I think so that was part of the process too. And you don't have to opt in for the text, but I wanted both the the opportunity to enroll, but also the opportunity to be reminded.
Yeah, which is important, right? Because this does two things. Right now we have motor voter, so most people register when they get their driver's license, but it is like one extra step. And anyone who's ever stood in line at a tag agency knows that like any extra step is too many, right? Mm-hmm. So when they're like, do you want to register to vote while you're waiting for us to print your thing? And you're like, no. This just makes it a little bit quicker. And so that addresses the registration gap. Mm-hmm. But then we also need to address the turnout gap. And while many elections are in November, as we just discussed, there's a lot of elections all the time. There's one next month.
Yeah,
right?
February 11th.
And then in April. And then like last year, I think I had the opportunity to vote 8 times in 2024. I love voting, but like, that's a lot of voting. Mm-hmm. And some of them I'm like, it's like one race and like I kind of know who's going to win. And so it felt like deprioritized. I still went, but it is more of a hassle. And the more of a hassle anything is, the fewer people are going to do it. Yep. And so this just sounds like your goal is just to streamline registration and help people get reminders about when elections are.
Yes.
All right. Well, that's exciting. We'll see. So I think you filed like 11 bills altogether. And I know that you, as a freshman legislator, are under no special belief that your bills will even necessarily get heard, right?
Correct.
Hopefully, right? Especially when they align with somebody else who might have been there longer, and you can, because often I think people file bills, and then once we have this deluge of 3,200 bills out there, then you're like, oh, hey man, you filed the same one, or something similar. Like, let's put our heads together and figure out which of these is the one that should go. I think we all wish that would happen up front, so we don't have to file so many, but that's just the way it goes sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a meetings person. I love meetings. So, for me, I would love like a 2-week session where all legislators are, coming together and sticky noting it. Like, these are the themes I'm thinking about. Right. But that would be impossible because there's many people, this is not their full-time job. Yeah. And so, we have to figure out a way. So yeah, I'm going through the bills, marking ones that I'm like, oh, I'm glad that person filed that legislation. Yeah. Hopefully I can sign on with that. Or, hey, that person's an ally for an issue I care about. Right. Making sure I can kind of put that in the back of my mind for future conversations. That's so funny that you said about sticky noting. Like I'm picturing the legislature coming into session with like the big sticky notes like around the room, and everyone's like putting their notes as if it's a team building exercise. Yeah. Oh my. But that is not how the legislature operates, right? Like it really is a group of individuals. And this is the part that always is hard for me, where it's like there's 101 people up there. Many of them are friends. Many of them are colleagues. They've worked together and known each other for years. But when it comes down to it, like each person is elected individually, right? So your voters are not the voters for your desk mate or the speaker or anybody else. And so you have an obligation to represent your district that might be at odds even with districts right next door that are very similar. And maybe the legislators support the same thing, but it makes this like uncomfortable allyship sometimes that is temporal at best. And so trying to navigate all that as a freshman where you have relationships with some of these folks personally and professionally from years past, and now all of that, those dynamics get factored in too. Yep. I don't envy you, Representative. It sounds like a lot of fun and also like a really big challenge. Definitely. Session hasn't started yet, so I don't know if you're coming home and like just like pulling your hair out yet, or you're going to save that for like April, May. Yeah. I'm more coming home just like needing to put on my glasses because I'm tired. Right. Just like so much to read, and meetings are being scheduled, and trying to learn as much as I possibly can about so much. I mean, I feel people are like, you have a head start. And I'm like, I have a head start on education, which I'm incredibly grateful for because that is it's the biggest part of the budget, Yeah. But there's 50% more of that budget that I come in with very limited knowledge on. Because you got to vote on things like feral hogs also that aren't the part of that. Well, Representative Ellen Pogemiller, thank you so much for being here today. Will you come back maybe later in session or at the end and give us your like postmortem experience on? We'll do before and after photos for how you. And I look like disheveled by the time I come back. No, I'd love that. Just clinking of glasses in the background. Yes. Yeah, that would be great. Well, thank you so much for being here. Thank you. All right, listeners, that is the end of our show for this week. Thanks so much for being here. Big thanks to Representative Ellen Pogemiller for her time with us this week. Friends, next week we'll be coming to you probably live from the state capitol after the State of the State address and as we get into the legislative session. And we'll just debrief whatever's said, whatever we think might happen then. Thanks so much for being with us this weekend. Friends, I ask, and I'm going to do this myself, take a break, right? Disconnect, get outside, touch grass. It should be a lovely, beautiful weekend for weather. Put on some shorts, let your, sun-kissed legs glow in the sunlight. Grab a friend, grab a beer, a burger, whatever it is. But find a way to decompress a little bit. We are on day 11
ish of the Trump presidency. We've got about 1,400 days to go, and we're going to make it to the end together. If you are a federal employee, don't take the deal. The government will survive because people like you stay in your position. Hold out as long as you can. Make them force you out. Do good work while you're there. You are standing in the way of someone else who's just an acolyte getting in there and dismantling America. And whatever your job is, you're doing a good job, right? Decisions are made by those who show up. Show up. However you can, show up. Have a good weekend.